Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, and today we're going to be concluding our discussion on not only the Venomized miniseries, but also the Venomverse era as a whole, as we take a look at Venomized number 5. So, last time on Venomized! So, utilizing his kinda sorta psychic connection with Jean, Scott was able to pinpoint where exactly the Poison's mothership was in orbit. As such, utilizing this knowledge, the X-Men plus various superheroes decided to go out into space and ambush the Poisons on the mothership. Unfortunately, while all the heroes were going up and they took two ships to do this, one of the ships was knocked down by the Poison Thanos, who came to Earth to get Kid Kaiju, who had once again entered the fray to help the heroes, and the Poisons still have their eyes very much set on him. Thankfully, one of the heroes who got knocked out of the sky was Anti-Venom, so he tries his best to fend off Thanos, but, well, Thanos still has his own abilities that can keep Anti-Venom away from him, so it's still very much a problem, and while the various heroes that are on the ground do their best to try and defeat Thanos, or try and fight off Thanos in whatever way they can, it's kind of a moot point since, again, it's Thanos, and combined with the fact that he's a poison Thanos, completely with all the abilities that come from that, well, it's clear this is not going to be an easy fight. So even when Kid Kaiju ends up summoning his monsters to help, we know that that's only going to help so much. In the meantime, back with the heroes that are going out into space. In the meantime, the various heroes still do their best to go out into space to try and ambush the Poison Mothership, and from there, well, that's kind of where we left off. As the heroes that are still making their way to space, which in this case consists of the time-displaced X-Men, Venom, Spider-Man, and Daredevil, for whatever reason, are being ambushed by more poison spacefaring heroes. Thankfully, they still manage to get a landing. They still manage to land on the Poison Mothership. If by landing I mean they crash, I mean literally. They take the X-Men's Danger ship and fly it right into the mothership, and they just break right through the wall. Thankfully, Danger is able to put up a hard light hologram to make sure they don't get sucked out into the vacuum of space. So hey, it's all good in that regard. But unfortunately for them, before the teams can make their way further into the ship, they're once again ambushed because it turns out Carnage managed to convince their magic guy, whose name I still don't remember, despite the fact that they do name it, despite the fact that they do actually say it one time in the comic. But either way, Carnage convinced him to bring them back to the ship. Although Scott immediately takes out the magic guy. As such, Venom tells the X-Men to just go out and deal with all this, while he and Spider-Man stay behind to deal with Carnage, which, if I can give credit where it's due, I kind of like having those rare moments where bitter rivals put aside their differences for a common foe. And when it comes to Venom and Carnage, or Venom and Spider-Man, while they have beefs up the wazoo and cannot stand the sight of one another, when it comes to Carnage, all of that just gets thrown out the window. So I kind of like that immediately Venom's like, me and Spider-Man will take care of this guy, and they just start working together to fight Carnage off, which even Carnage kind of admires the nostalgia of all that. But either way, a good chunk of the X-Men end up going off to try and find the Poison Queen, which in this case, those X-Men consist of Bloodstorm, which I think is the time-displaced X-Men's version of Storm, Scott, and Beast, while Angel, Ice, and Iceman stay behind. Again, also Daredevil. Again, I'm sorry, I know I keep saying also Daredevil, but he really is just there. He doesn't do anything in the story. But in the meantime, back on Earth, the battle against Thanos is seemingly going well for the good guys, as Kid Kaiju's monsters just are beating the ever-living shit out of this guy and are seemingly winning. As such, they do take a bit of time to gloat on this, but unfortunately this victory is just an illusion, which... Sorry, Soda. But because, as one of the monsters, Scrag, is talking about how maybe they shouldn't rub their victory in this guy's face, which, again, I love how Scrag, despite being the most monstrous of them all, is also the nicest one. Either way, as Scrag is the one telling them maybe they shouldn't gloat, one of the bigger poisons, who's again one of those characters that I don't know, manages to point a gun at Scrag and manages to unload a few symbiotes on him and ends up bonding him to them. And of course, Scrag immediately feels the power up and he's like, "Oh man, this is awesome! I feel stronger! I welcome my new symbiotic companion!" As he just starts whipping Thanos' ass. Unfortunately, Kid Kaiju knows very well that this is a bad thing, and so while he tells Scrag to run, it's unfortunately too little too late, as immediately some little poisons run up to Scrag, and well, yeah, Scrag gets consumed, and from there, Scrag is immediately all for the Hive, as he talks about how he will destroy anyone that even dares oppose the Hive, and of course, since the poisons still want Kid Kaiju, he immediately turns his attention to trying to get him, and I admit it is a little painful to see this, because immediately Kid Kaiju is just like, no, please, Scrag, please don't do this. And he tries getting through to him, and it's not working. Even the other monsters try doing their best to try and get through to Scrag, but it's like ultimately just shooting paintballs at a brick wall. It's not doing anything. As such, Anti-Venom, realizing he can't let a monster like that just roam free throughout New York, ends up jumping at Scrag and, well, immediately just decks one of his fists right into his armor, which causes an immediate volatile reaction, which starts causing the poisoned Scrag to just start convulsing in pain as he starts dying. And as such, Kid Kaiju just watches in horror, and he asks, what's going on, what did you do to him? And Anti-Venom apologizes, but before Scrag dies, he does manage to get out one last bit of few words. And these ones aren't of the poison that's controlling him, it's from the real Scrag himself, as he immediately just whispers to Kid Kaiju that he loves him. Before, unfortunately, the Dragon Man of Kid Kaiju's monsters ends up having to incinerate him, and yeah, all that's left of the poison Scrag is just his armor and some symbiote goop. So, yeah, that one's actually a bit hard. It's brief, but it does hurt a little. Speaking of poisons, going back to the mothership, as Venom and Spidey are doing their best to duke it out with Carnage, well, things aren't really going in their favor. Carnage is, of course, as bloodthirsty as ever and just gloating about how since he's now technically a poison, he's got even bit more of a power up on him, so he can just kick their ass at something fierce. And in the midst of the battle, he almost gets a one up on Venom and chokes him. But when Spider-Man tries going in for a rescue, well, Carnage manages to do a surprise attack as he shoots out some spikes right into Spider-Man's gut, causing him to fall on the floor. As such, Venom realizes, okay, shit, we're losing this battle here. We're losing this battle here. We need to find a way to get rid of Carnage once and for all. So he immediately says, hey, X-Men, do you think you could order your ship to open up a hole into space? But, well, Danger heard him and said, actually, you don't need to tell the X-Men to order me that. I can do it myself. Just everyone hold on. And sure enough, Danger opens up a hole in the Hardlight hologram shield, and yeah, immediately the vacuum of space starts sucking things through. The majority of the X-Men manage to hold on to everything, but sadly Spider-Man is too far away from everybody, so unfortunately he gets pulled out into space, and Venom just tells him, and the only thing Venom is able to tell him is to just let the symbiote try and keep him safe, since after all, the symbiote should protect Spider-Man from the vacuum of space. But thankfully, though, Venom's plan went off without a hitch, as immediately Carnage gets thrown out into space too, and well, he's no longer a threat to anybody. However, back on the ship with Cyclops, Beast, and Bloodstorm, they manage to make their way to the center of the ship, and sure enough, they do manage to find the source of the poisons, the Poison Queen, who immediately starts utilizing her psychic defenses to try and make all of them see whoever they want to see. Like, Scott looks at her and he sees Jean Grey not corrupted by the poisons. Hank looks at her and he sees a character known as the Goblin Queen, who is supposed to actually be Madeline Pryor. Who just tells him to move along. With Bloodstorm, she sees a man that she had fallen in love with, but Bloodstorm is also the one that realizes, no, these are all just psychic lures. None of this is real. And with that revelation, all of them are able to see through the illusion, and yep, we are finally bearing witness to the Poison Queen. And I'll give credit where it's due. She does look kind of imposing. Like, this is what she looks like. Considering the poisons are said to kind of operate on a hive mind, her appearance makes sense, as essentially she just looks like a bigger version of the little poisons. And considering how spindly they are, I kind of like how she almost looks like a plant. How her head looks like it's more of it's the head of a flower about to bloom. How it looks more imposing. How it's I guess I can call it skirt looks like a shadow, as you can see more little poisons just bursting out of it, showcasing how connected they are to her, and so on and so forth. And again, she looks like she's meant to be the center of the hive mind, so I dig it. But unfortunately, with the heroes now able to see through her psychic defense, immediately the Poison Queen just immediately turns decides, you know what, screw this, I'm not even going to try and convince you to stop, I'm just going to kill you right now. As immediately the three heroes just convulse in pain as they feel a psychic attack on their heads. And yeah, it turns out that's the reason why the Poison Queen wanted Jean to stay back in the last issue, since after all, if you remember last issue, she told Dr. Doom and Jean to stay back and guard her. And yeah, the Poison Queen is able to utilize Jean's own psychic abilities to utilize, so that, yeah. The Poison Queen kept Jean on standby so she could utilize her psychic abilities to turn against any enemies. And it turns out part of the reason for this is because it turns out there is still a little bit of Jean inside her poison body. Her mind is still intact, and she's still somewhat trying to resist the Queen. So the Queen is and so part of the reason the Queen had her on standby like this was so that she could try and suppress any bit of the original Jean that's still in there. And as such, while Poison Jean is just kind of standing by and letting all this happen, Scott's just kind of convulsing in pain and just crying out to Jean, telling her, please, don't do this, just stop. And while it looks like that she's not listening, immediately her eyes light up as she says in her own voice, Scott? And yeah, immediately her eyes start glowing as just her whole form starts irradiating. And immediately the psychic influence that she was utilizing on the heroes is immediately thrown back on the Queen as she starts convulsing in pain herself. And as such, Dr. Doom sees this, and the Queen immediately asks for his help. And while Doom immediately wants to rush to her aid and help her, Venom is able to catch up with the group. And holds Doom back before he can stop them. As the Poison Gene is just there glowing, suddenly she immediately erupts in power, and she actually kind of destroys her poison form. And underneath it, we see, well, I guess I can say psychic power Jean, as we see her body now reconstituted, but instead of looking human, she looks like she's a being of pure pink psychic energy or whatever. And basically, because of her time as part of the Poison Collective, she's still technically in their heads. And as a result, she finally says, you know what? I'm sick of this shit. I'm sick of all this death. I'm sick of all the hunting, and I'm sick of all these poisons. I'm just ending them. As she immediately turns her attack right onto the Queen and just starts destroying her from the inside out. And on top of that, because of this, she immediately throws out a psychic feedback wave that immediately spreads to all the poisons around the area. As back on Earth, all the little poisons start convulsing in pain as all of them start screaming, and all around New York, all the bigger poisons that are heroes all start reacting the same way, and so one by one, they all just start falling apart as they all just turn brittle, fall to pieces, and all leave nothing in the wake of poison armor and what's left of symbiotic goop, effectively killing them all. Even Dr. Doom ends up just dying in Venom's hands, and as such, yeah, the poisons are defeated. Kind of an easy win, if you ask me. But yeah, with Jean now technically free from the poison control, she starts kind of powering down, so to speak, and she does manage to revert back into her human form, and so Scott immediately runs up to her and asks if she's okay, if something's wrong, and so forth, and Jean actually talks about how when she was absorbed by the poisons, all that was really left of her was her mind, and so just little by little, she tried holding on to whatever she had of herself and just started putting the pieces back together until she became something new. And basically, she has no idea what she made herself into. She doesn't even know if she's technically human anymore, but Scott doesn't really care. All he's happy is that he's got her back, as he just embraces her in a hug, or he kisses her. I gotta go back. Let me look at the comic. Let me tell you if he kisses her or not. No, it's a hug. And he just tells her welcome back. As such, with the poisons now defeated, the heroes on the ship all reconvene and get back into danger, who managed to fly out and grab Spider-Man. And his symbiote was able to keep him alive, though he's still very critically injured, so once he's brought back on the ship, Venom tells Spidey just kind of shut it and take a rest so they'll let his symbiote heal him up. So, yeah, it's all good. Venom tells Jean that he's happy to have her back, and from there, the comic just kind of starts wrapping itself up as we get a montage of everyone as everything is undone. We see Alchemax experimenting on all the heroes who have been bonded with symbiotes as they start trying to figure out ways to get them off. We then cut to the X-Men as we see them go back to the planet Clintar as they release all the symbiotes back into the wild. And we check back in, and it turns out that, while the Poison Queen may have been defeated, not all poisons were destroyed, as some of them actually managed to survive being severed from the Queen. Specifically, Poison Wolverine, who I suspect is supposed to be Jimmy, and Carnage. Carnage doesn't stay dead, and somehow he manages to get human again. I don't know, don't ask, I don't know comics. The point is, they're both still alive, and they can both cause trouble. But in the meantime, we cut to the island of Mu, which is where Kid Kaiju lived, and as we see him and his monsters building a grave for Scrag. And while they mourn their loss, they still take solace in that they still have each other, that the bonds they carry are still strong. And throughout these montages, Jean is just monologuing about how it's that connection that the Poisons doubted, that the Poisons underestimated that, and it's because they stood together and stood strong that they were able to win and get through this, and blah blah blah. It's all pretty cheesy and crummy, but we do get at least a somewhat happy note as Kid Kaiju walks away with his friends. We see one of Scrag's mini Scrags floating through and let out one last word of Scrag as it flies after them. So, yeah, that was Venomized. Okay, I should probably give my thoughts on this finale. Okay, look. I'll give my full thoughts on Venomized after I give my thoughts on this issue, but up to this point, I thought Venomized was entertaining enough. It had some good stuff, some good action. I liked seeing how things went about, and I liked seeing the heroes try and figure out how to take on the poisons and adapt to their strategies, but issue 5 of Venomized, I think, is where they kind of hit a roadblock. They kind of just can't... It's like... Okay, let me put it this way. In Venomverse, while things kind of felt like they moved a little fast in Venomverse, at least it felt like the plot was progressing at a normal pace. Even in the finale, it felt like things were moving along at its own gradual pace. And then when we got to the Venoms infiltrating the Poison ship and trying to set the whole thing for self-destruct, it felt like there was genuine tension thrown into the mix. Like we knew what the Venoms were there for, but we knew that even the slightest thing could go wrong, and that if they didn't stop it, that they could fail. But it also felt like the victory was just so close. It felt like that we were earning our happy ending here. That the heroes were doing everything in their power to combat the threat of the poisons, and then ultimately discover a strategy that could take them down for good. It actually felt like it was earned in that regard, and the way they build up to it, the way they establish it, the way they showcase the heroes as they kept coming up with new strategies and kept trying to combat around the poisons, I thought it worked. It actually worked well, and as a result, the ending of Venomverse actually felt like a genuine strong ending. Well, for the most part, again, it still felt like there was really nothing. There was really no epilogue, and it just kind of came to an end. It kind of just ended after the action stopped. But at the very least, it still felt like a proper finale. The Venoms managed to get a victory. It was a tight-knit one, but they got it. They won. The bad guys were beaten. It's all good. So it at least felt like a proper finale, even if the epilogue felt like it was just there to be tacked on and showcased. Oh, look, the heroes are fine. Like that, I felt was crummy, but otherwise the finale worked. But for Venomized, it's Deus Ex Machina bullshit. Just nothing here really hinted at what this finale would be. While we did get some psychic glimpses of Jean every now and then with Scott, that's all they really were. Glimpses. While I could buy the idea that Jean was in there, that Jean was still underneath the poison exoskeleton, just trying to Viver control and trying to contact Scott and say, Scott, please help me. At the very least, it felt like it was just a glimmer every here and there. And again, it was, like I said, it was hinted throughout Venomized that when someone is consumed by the poison, some remnant of who they are is still in there, both in body and mind. It's just that what's there is so minimal that it's essentially mostly poison that just happens to look like the original host with all their powers and abilities. So in a way, while there was still some minor hope, it was clear that ultimately that was just a scrap. So in a way, I can understand why there would still be a fragment of Jean in there. Considering her own psychic abilities, I can understand how she could utilize that to remain in control and predominantly in the forefront of her poison self's mind. Because after all, even as a poison, Jean had psychic abilities. So if her original mind was still intact, and since the poisons operate on a hive mind, she could still be in there and still be vying for control, which I actually can kind of buy. Now, for the most part, while poison Jean was in the driver's seat, in the background, the regular Jean was there just subtly influencing her actions and trying to find ways to undo what had happened to her, and likewise to help her friends without tipping the Poison Queen off that she was there. Though the ending made it clear the Poison Queen was aware of these advances and was actively taking steps to try and prevent her from coming back. So again, kind of a crapshoot whether that would work. But I'm just gonna say this right now. Jean just coming right the hell out of nowhere as this uber powerful psychic what's-its and saying, you know what, fuck you guys, and just kind of killing the Poison Queen like that? It feels lame. Like, really fucking lame. At the very least, in Venomverse, we saw the Venoms duke it out with the poisons on several occasions. And while the poisons were greatly overpowering the Venoms, at the very least you saw that they were gaining capabilities. And in the case of Venomverse, the Venoms were getting small victories here and there. While the poisons were predominantly winning for the most part, the Venoms were still with every encounter, learned and adapted to what the poisons were doing. When Venom first arrived on the scene, the Venoms immediately all scattered, and when Spider-Man got taken, Venom was thankfully pulled out of the fire by other Venoms who managed to come in and save his hide and even drive off Spider-Man. From there, they found a new place that they could set up shop, namely Our Lady of Saints, where they pulled in Carnage, who gave them an even better advantage, and while they still suffered losses from when the poisons attacked them at that point, they still had a strategy, even though the poisons even managed to kind of get a victory there when they kidnapped Doctor Strange. From there, the Venoms were continuing creating new strategies to take on the poisons. In this case, they ambushed a couple of poisons and took one out and kidnapped one for the sake of getting out information. And after that, when Deadpool revealed that he was a double agent and offered them assistance, we saw new plans developing. For Venomverse, it felt like things were moving at a brisk pace, that things were advancing, developing, and thus likewise when we got to the finale, it felt like it was the Venom's it felt like it was the cornerstone of the Venom's plans, that they've taken all these steps to combat the poisons, and now they finally hit a point where they can take the fight directly to them, hit them where it hurts, and end the threat. But then likewise for Venomized, we really didn't have that notion. When we got to the big developments, they were just kind of thrown out of nowhere. Because when the heroes of the Marvel Universe were duking it out with the poisons, it really didn't feel like they were gaining any headway. In the case of the poisons, like I said, the majority of the issues in Venomized kind of followed a similar trend. The poisons attacked and infected people with symbiotes and then would try and assimilate them into the hive. Rinse and repeat for every issue. While the heroes did their best to fend them off and did try and think of strategies to try and combat the poisons by trying to figure out how to get the symbiotes off of the host that they had been bound to, at the very least, ultimately, no steps were really taken to try and combat the poisons directly beyond engaging them in combat when they attacked. And as a result, it really felt like that nothing was really totally developing on the front of combating the poisons. In fact, if anything, the poisons were the ones that were taking more steps than the heroes were. They were the ones that were learning from their mistakes. They were the ones that were actively trying to figure out ways to cover up their weak spots to be stronger when it came to this battle. They immediately started targeting Kid Kaiju because of his own abilities and what they could do for the hive if he was assimilated into them. They immediately went after Cletus Cassidy and bound him to a symbiote so they could get him on their side, since after all in Venomverse Carnage was a major problem for them, so they figured, hey, what if we had him on our side? Again, that's smart thinking. When Anti-Venom got brought into the fray, you think he would be a major weapon for the heroes, but he isn't. He appear like the most he does is that he kills Poison Punisher and then kills Poison Scrag. Those should be like major milestones, but you think he would have a bigger part in the climax of the story, but no. He's stuck on Earth, just duking it out. It's treated as if he's any other soldier in the battlefield, but it doesn't do anything. He's just another face in the crowd. The real stars of this are basically the X-Men that went up to the ship, and for the most part, none of them do anything to stop the poisons. So Venom and Spider-Man do their part in trying to fight Carnage, but ultimately, how he's beaten is being thrown into space. And yeah, that's a major that helps kind of weaken the poison's grounds quite a bit. But it's made clear when the heroes go to face the Poison Queen that they would have that if it wasn't for Jean coming back, they would have probably lost. That was it. Like, everything was just all... So Jean coming out of nowhere and being like, no, actually, I'm alive, and I'm gonna kill all of you. It doesn't feel earned. It feels like a Deus Ex Machina, just some kind of contrived plot bullshit. Like, they pretty much just said, "Oh, I don't really know how the heroes can realistically win this, so here's some bullshit I just pulled out of my ass." So, and again, before you could argue that maybe this was planned from the beginning. That after all, Jean being assimilated back in the Poison X storyline could have been building up to this, since after all, as I said, the version of the X-Men we saw in X-Men Blue are time-displaced versions of the X-Men. So realistically, you should expect them to come back. So you know what? Maybe this was planned out. Maybe from the moment that Jean was assimilated in Poison X, it was building up to this climax in Venomized. But the thing is, and I hate to say this, Jean was barely a character in Venomized. She was there, and they hinted that she and Scott still had a connection, that potentially she was still there. But when it came to major plot advancements, she was no different than any other Poison. And the X-Men, despite the fact that Jean had a connection with Scott, weren't that important in the plot. More attention was focused on Spider-Man and Venom and the other heroes than the X-Men. The X-Men were just other characters. The major focus was mostly on the people who were bound to symbiotes as they were trying to figure out ways to get them off, while also trying to stop the Poisons from going after innocent people. So as a result, not only does this feel out of nowhere because of how far everything went, I didn't think it was built up to that well. Again, it was hinted throughout the miniseries that Jean was there in the background. But in terms of character, in terms of her connection to Scott, it really did not feel like a very prominent factor in the story. And because the X-Men weren't that big of a deal in the story, it ultimately makes the climax feel like an ass pull. Like, it was like someone just didn't know how to end the miniseries, so they said, well, Jean blows him up. Like, that's it. That's their climax. Again, before you say, well, the climax of Venomverse was that they literally just blew up a ship, but again, there was tension. We saw how the Venoms struggled to face off against the Poisons, to adapt, to overcome, and even in their final hour, they were still struggling so hard. They knew what they had to do, but it was very clear that they could lose at any moment. There was sufficient tension throughout the story, and this victory was built up to perfectly, showcasing the Venoms as they tried their best to figure out how to best take on the Poisons, given the Poisons' capabilities versus their own. And so when they finally set up the strategy of, we just gotta blow them up, we just gotta blow them to sky high and then just make a run for it, it actually felt like tension, because even if the Venoms got victory in that regard, there was no guarantee that they would get out alive, since after all, their escape plan all rested on Doctor Strange being able to cast a return spell to send him home. And even in the climax, he said that he was weakened, and that doing a spell could just take everything out of them, but they had no choice in that regard. So as a result, it still had suitable tension, and it made you wonder, do they get out of this okay? How are they going to get out of this? And ultimately, a victory is achieved through their own capabilities, and that feels earned because we've been following these characters throughout that miniseries. But then you get to Venomized, and Venomized treats the whole Poison invasion like a big event. And before you say, well, isn't this kind of like a Spider-Verse adjacent storyline? Shouldn't it be treated like kind of a big event? And in a way, fair enough. But the problem with treating it like an event and jumping over the universe so much is that you don't really have a major focus. The closest thing we have to a major focus are the heroes as they're split up, with one team being Captain America as he leads his team of heroes against the poisons, and the other is Venom, the X-Men, and Spider-Man. But even then, the X-Men, I just kind of considered afterthoughts, while Venom is the one that does most of the talking. And most of that talking is him arguing with Spider-Man over what they have to do next. And while the X-Men do contribute here and there, they don't feel like they're as much of a major focus as they should be. Like, I feel like if the whole thing with Jean was properly built up to, it wouldn't feel as bad. Like, ultimately, Scott throughout the story, maybe Scott talks to her every now and then, and she actually does speak to him as she is. And we're left wondering if this is truly a trap or not. Like, maybe we can see Poison Jean as she's engaged in the conversation maybe Poison Doom comes up to her and asks for help, and he asks, what are you doing? It's like, nothing. It's like, nothing, I'm just setting something up. Or maybe and thus we kind of cast doubt on her. And then likewise, when the poisons ambush the heroes, we think, oh, maybe she is on the poison side. But then we learn, no, the real Jean was in there, as we see her finally showcase, no, it's like, as we see her finally break out and say, no, I'm here the whole time, I'm going to end this, I'm not going to let you hurt the people I love. I feel like that could have been better. It probably wouldn't have been great. It might still have been an ass pull, but at the very least, it would have at least felt like that it would have at least felt more built up to. But because this climax just feels so out of left field, it does not feel like a proper finale. It comes more across like the creative team had no idea how to properly end this story, so they just said, oh, fuck it, let's just make Jean Grey this uber powerful being and just have her blow their shit up. So yeah, I'm gonna consider. So yeah, as a result, I don't think it's a good finale. It feels kind of lame, honestly. It is sweet to see Cyclops and Jean reuniting, which, you know what, I like. And the whole thing with Scrag, even though how small it was, really did kind of hurt, because after all, despite Scrag being this big monstrous creature, he was ultimately a nice guy and did everything he did because he wanted to help people, even though he was created by Kai Kawada. And so when he was ultimately converted to the poisons and turned against this team, I liked the way that they reacted, how scared they were, how Kai and the rest of the monsters were trying to get through to Scrag, but ultimately Anti-Venom had to tell them, I'm sorry, he's too far gone, we have to stop him before he actually hurts someone. And so Anti-Venom has no choice but to put him down. And just before Scrag dies, you just see a little glimmer of the original Scrag there as he tells Kai that he loves him. I like that. It's small, but it does rouse a little bit of emotion, especially when after Scrag is killed, you just see Kai lying there on the ground with just fighting back tears while the monsters are behind him. Which I have to remind you that his name is Kid Kaiju. So imagine being a kid who's learned that he can create giant monsters just by drawing in a notebook, and now he sees one of those monsters one of these monsters who he did consider a friend, suddenly just turned to goop. Imagine, like, that's got to be kind of a horrifying sight for a child to take in. So yeah, I give you that. That actually did do something for me, and I will give credit where it's due. It was still cool to see Venom and Spider-Man teaming up to face off against Poison Carnage, even it was cool to see them face off against Poison Carnage before they get jettisoned into space. And yeah, when Spider-Man got stabbed, it really did feel like an oh shit moment. But that also kind of contributes to how much of an ass pull it is, since almost none of those heroes contributed to the finale. Literally none of them did. You could argue that maybe Scott was fighting back, and maybe it was him getting hurt that finally triggered Jean getting free from the poison's control, but that's still kind of a big if. It still feels like an ass pull, in my opinion. And again, like with Venomverse, the epilogue is very much just rushed and just feels tacked on there to show there's finale, because we never learn how the symbiotes are removed from their hosts, and we never see how the symbiotes are removed from their hosts. When we see them all just dump back on Clintar like nothing happened. And I'm going to say this right now, Jean's final speech just felt corny, like very corny. And eyes are like, it's meant to be all warm and fuzzy and nice, but in my opinion, it just felt a little too out. It felt a little too cheesy and didn't really help. And I felt it could have been a little bit more somber, considering that part of her narration was over the funeral service that Kid Kaiju and his mom and his friends were holding for Scrag. So, hold on one second. Sorry about that. Shindy was barking at a delivery man. But yeah, I think I've kind of beaten this dead horse enough if it is. My point is, issue 5 feels has its share of cool moments, but ultimately, as the end of the Venomized story, it feels hollow, feels rushed. Like they really had no idea how to properly end the comic, and so they just kind of threw something out there and hoped it would stick. So yeah, ultimately, it's kind of disappointing. Sorry, Chinny jumped in. But do I think Venomized is disappointing? Well, as I said a while ago, I do actually enjoy Venomized. Is it good? Maybe. I at least can say this. Compared to Venomverse, Venomized kind of feels like a hollow follow-up. At least with Venomverse, it felt kind of fast-paced. It at least felt like that the plot was developing, that things were moving along, that the characters were adapting, that the Venoms were struggling and fighting for their victories, and ultimately when they gained one, it was slim, but it was achieved and earned at the very least. So it felt like a complete story in that regard. So I at least think that was good. But for Venomized, as I've hopefully established throughout these vlogs, the plot really just felt slow to develop. While there was development as the story went along, every issue up to issue 5 felt like it just kind of followed the same patterns when it came to progression. The poisons attack, infect people with symbiotes, and then come back around to hopefully absorb them into the hive, and then rinse and repeat every issue. Sometimes a hero would be absorbed, sometimes they would fight back and realize, oh shit, these things are dangerous, we gotta get these suits off. So it really felt, and as a result, the whole story just kind of felt slow. Like I said, there were plot developments throughout the story, like when Venom, the X-Men, and Spider-Man went to Alchemax to try and figure out how the symbiote, figure out what was going on with the symbionts, and then have Anti-Venom come in. That at least felt like the heroes were taking steps to try and combat it. But at the very least, but even then, the next major development happened in issue 4 with Scott saying, "I know where they are," when Jean sent him the psychic message, and as a result, and even then, that doesn't really just feel earned. It felt like with the ending, it felt like just a plot hook that they were thrown just to keep the plot moving along. The whole meat of the story really involves the heroes of the Marvel Universe being infected with symbiotes and then duking it out with the poisons, which I will give credit. One of the things that I do legitimately like about Venomized is the clash. Like with Venomverse, the poisons are still legitimately creepy villains, and with their whole agenda in this storyline being to just infect as many superheroes as they can with symbiotes, so they can later come back around and and hit them with poisons, I think it works. I do legitimately like that, and it feels like a natural evolution from what they were doing in Venomverse, since their whole plan in Venomverse was to assimilate was for them to assimilate Doctor Strange into their fold, so that he could use his magics to bring them more symbiote hosts from across the multiverse and bolster their ranks. And since that plan failed, the next logical step is fine. Then we'll just go make our own heroes. And so they began invading various universes, attaching as many symbiotes as they can to any superpowered individuals they can find, and then assimilating them. Again, it's a natural, and again, it kind of fits into what they were doing, and it kind of makes sense. And the whole assimilation thing still feels even creepier because it essentially marks everyone who gets bonded with a symbiote for death, as before they at least felt like they had a fighting chance. But then when they're bonded with a symbiote, while they all get a power up from being bonded with these living alien piles of slime, it also acts as a hindrance, because now they have to be more cautious in battle, because with these symbiotes on, they cannot touch the poisons. They can't get near them. And while the best solution would be to just hide and take cover and just try and think of another plan to take the poisons down, because the poisons are hitting the heroes where it hurts, i.e. attacking civilians, the heroes have to do something. If they don't, then innocent people will get hurt, and if they do, then they're liable to be assimilated by the poisons and be killed. So it's again a toss-up, and I do legitimately like that. So I like that little added bit of tension whenever the heroes duke it out with the poisons, that anyone with a symbiote could be next, that they have to just that ultimately the best course of action is to run, but running means potentially allowing the bad guys to cause more harm. So they have to kind of weigh their options and figure out what the best course of action is, especially especially since the poisons do have specific targets in mind this time around, like when they continue trying to target Kid Kaiju, as while he did want to help in any way he could, as a result, as he wanted to help in any way he could, ultimately he was also kind of a high risk to have around, because the instant the poison saw him, they all zeroed in on him. When Killer Thrill saw him, she immediately tried darting for him. When Thanos saw him, he tried to grab him. When Scrag was assimilated, he immediately started attacking the kid. But it creates another bit of tension when you know the poisons are directly going after you, not because you have a symbiote, but because if you did, you'd be a very valuable asset to them. So I do at least like that. And there are still some legitimately good, cool moments. I liked seeing Carnage being assimilated into the Poison Hive mind. Poison Carnage legitimately looked cool. Like I said, I also liked when Cletus was bound with the symbiote. You could still see like little snippets of the original Carnage symbiote in there potentially from his bloodstream. Like with how his eyes were red and how he had a few red markings around his body, despite the fact that his symbiote was predominantly black. So I thought it was cool. It was legit. I thought that was cool. There are still some legitimately cool moments in the story, but because the plot feels slower in comparison to Venomverse, and the finale doesn't feel as built up to, it feels like it feels weaker in comparison. Does that mean it's bad? I do enjoy Venomized for what it does right. It is in a way, it's kind of like a thrill ride from beginning to end. It's cool to see the heroes as they get infected with the symbiotes, as the designs they have for them are cool, and like with Venomverse, it is cool to see what what appearances they take on once they get a symbiote. As like with Venomverse, when we saw all the different Venomized superheroes, seeing the heroes of the Marvel Universe each get bond with their own symbiotes and what they do and what those symbiotes do to them is legitimately cool to see, and I actually enjoyed that, even though I know being bonded with those symbiotes was a safety hazard considering the poisons were around. But even that was kind of cool, as I kind of liked seeing the designs they came up with when heroes were assimilated into the Poison Collective. It was legitimately cool seeing Thor become a poison, even if it was briefly. I liked seeing the heroes clashing with poison versions of themselves, considering the poisons have been jumping across universes. So I dig that. I think it's cool. I think that's kind of nice. And I do at the and even the finale with and even in the final issue when Scrag got bonded one, it did really feel like an oh shit kind of moment. So there are still some cool moments in there. But unfortunately for me, the story really doesn't do much for me. It doesn't really feel like that the story has a main character, if that makes any sense. Even in event comics, you have certain heroes here and there who are predominantly dealing with a crisis, even if other heroes are acting as support. But unfortunately, I didn't really feel like we got that in Venomized. The most we had for that was Captain America, then Venom, and Spider-Man. But even then, that still felt weaker. I guess you could also say the X-Men, but again, the connection with Scott and Jean just felt very weak. And despite their experience of the poisons in space, they really didn't bring a lot to the table. Venom was the one that was giving out all the information, and the most he gave was, "Aren't you listening? The symbiotes are here. The symbiotes are just as much victims in this as everyone else." And then we got Spider-Man, who was of course being an asshole for no reason, which again, I know he's biased towards the symbiotes, but come on, even he should realize that the symbiotes want this just as much as the heroes of Earth want this. So I'm gonna still call crap on that. I'm still gonna call crap on it. As a result, it just feels like it feels like mindless battles between heroes and these monsters that all just kind of come out to the same thing. And any plot developments we get are so scattered throughout that it doesn't really feel like we're advancing too much. It just feels like the main focus is mostly on the Venomized heroes versus the poisons, which again kind of makes sense considering that the story is called Venomized. And so when you have a title like that, you expect people to be assimilated and start getting their own symbiotes, which we do get. But considering what caused this, it feels like the predominant focus should be on how to combat the poisons. I feel like that would have been better. And again, you can argue that with Venomverse, because the Venoms were essentially deep in the Lion's Den, considering the battlefield was a universe that the poisons had completely conquered, so they were fighting for survival there, versus here where it's a straight up invasion and the heroes are just trying to maintain the front lines and stop the poisons from getting any more ground. you can kind of set that. I think that I you know what, that's legitimate compare. That's a legitimately good way of comparing them and explaining things out. Because in Venomized or in Venomverse, the tension felt real because of the setting, whereas in Venomized, it is just mostly the heroes trying to do their best to keep the poisons out. So I can understand that. So if you want to argue against me, against my criticism by saying that Venomverse and Venomized had different tones because of that, you know what? That could be a fair criticism. But by that same token, by having that be the setting of Venomized, it also kind of makes the battles feel weaker. At the very least, if they wanted to try and lessen it, they could have showcased that the poisons were probably more prepared for the heroes of Earth than they realized. And as a result, when the heroes do go up against the poisons, they have to hide and they have to essentially run and hide, or at the very least, just showcase the poisons are a much bigger problem than we established. Maybe have the poisons advancing and showcase that that things are kind of coming to a standstill, and the heroes are just trying to do their best to maintain stable footing while also trying to find their weak point. So they could still showcase the poisons are a legitimate threat, because what I'm seeing here is that they're just a bunch of superpowered jockeys who are just doing their best to try and just bully everybody around to try and get heroes coming out so they can assimilate them. So it really feels like, as a result, it doesn't really feel like that I guess I get, so I'm sorry, I'm stammering here. In a way, I can kind of see why Venomized probably isn't, when you compare their settings, probably is weaker in comparison to Venomverse. But by that same token, since the setting is literally just the heroes trying to hold the front lines and stop the poisons from getting ground, ultimately that's what keeps everything stagnating. Because ultimately the hero's main priority is to stop the poisons from causing harm, with ultimately taking the poisons down being something in the background. And it's as a result, when they do finally take down the poisons and they do get it, it feels not earned. Especially considering that, again, the heroes barely did anything to set it all off. It was all Jean, who had been assimilated at that point, and who up to then didn't really even feel like a character in the story, aside from the occasional cry out to Scott. So yeah, I'm gonna still consider that a problem in the comic as a whole. Does that mean I hate Venomized? No. Venomized itself is fine, but that's all it is. It's fine. The mindless action is cool. I like seeing the heroes of Earth duke it out with the poisons and what comes of it. I like seeing the heroes get assimilated and get their own symbiotes. I like the added risk of doing that. I like seeing more of the cool action bits as we saw more set pieces come into play, like when we saw Poison Carnage or Kid Kaiju and his giant monsters. I liked seeing. So I liked the battles. I liked the tensions and cliffhangers that we would get every here and there. But unfortunately, if I have to compare Venomized to Venomverse, Venomverse will win. Venomverse was not great either, but I can at least still say it was a good comic. At the very least, while it felt fast-paced, it had good reason for being fast-paced considering the setup. No issue felt like that they were dragging their feet. There were continuous developments with the heroes as they went along and tried to find ways to combat the poisons, and as a result, the finale still actually felt earned. Whereas with Venomized, the story felt like it kind of dragged its feet and favored more of the action than actual plot advancement, and then when it finally got to the actual climax, it just felt like it came out of nowhere and wasn't properly built up to. So, as a result, while I think Venomized is entertaining enough, you're probably best off reading Venomverse in comparison. Like I said, Venomized isn't bad, but it very much is a weaker sequel when compared to its predecessor. So, there you go. Again, I'm sorry I'm sorry if you like the story, and Mr. Boone, if you're reading this, please don't take this against me. I still think you're an awesome writer, dude, and I very much respect your abilities, and I still enjoy the comic, okay? I still happily own it. Just don't hate me, please. But these are my honest thoughts. I'm sorry if I offended you. I don't mean to offend anybody. If I have offended someone, I'm sorry, but I do hope you still legit. But I do hope and if you do like this comic, good. I'm glad. I like it too. Like I said, I just think that the other comic, that Venomverse, is a lot better. So again, sorry, but otherwise, I think that's really all I have to say for when it comes to Venomized. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. And honestly, with that, I think we're kind of done with the Venomverse era. This one was a lot more interesting to do and compare to the Spider-Verse era, which I like doing the Spider-Verse era, but with how the Venomverse storylines were handled, it felt very intriguing, as rather than looking at different variants of the webhead, we just kind of saw different versions of Venom. And likewise, while Spider-Man kind of filtered through the same story and just put it in different scenarios and setups, with the Venomverse storylines, it was kind of interesting to see how the characters kind of reacted to being bonded with symbiotes, and how that affected them, how they combated it, how they accepted it. And likewise, like with Spider-Verse, it was still cool to see those different personalities coming together and working off of each other in whatever way they can. And so, as a result, the Venomverse era, while different, I think was unique enough. It still has enough there that you can still kind of count it as part of the as being part of the Spider-Verse web, so to speak. Since after all, it still kind of has multiple versions of a character meeting up. Although in this case it could be tangential, since like I said, a lot of the characters are only Venoms in name only, since it was just different heroes bonded with the Venom symbiotes. But at the very least, it was still, in my opinion, a honestly interesting idea. It was still cool to see these different tales told throughout the multiverse. It was still cool to see all these different Venomized heroes from different realities having to come together and face a common threat. The Poisons, I think, were honestly a legitimately good threat as villains, and the follow-ups, I think, worked. Poison X was, I think, a nice little interquel between Venomverse and Venomized, and I think it bridged the gap well and told an interesting story that could pull you in and make you wonder what the Poisons were up to next. So I dig that. And while Venomized didn't feel as good compared to Venomverse, I think it was still fine enough for what it was, and still had enough cool action and set pieces to at least keep your attention until the finale, even if the finale felt somewhat disappointing. So as a result, I think that while the Venomverse era was very much different than what we were from what we saw in the Spider-Verse era, I still think it was an interesting journey to go through, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself along with me as we continued through it. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. So, I hope that you stayed long enough I hope you stayed till the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed yourself, because, well, on Saturday we're going to be bidding adieu to the Venomverse era as we move on, as I think it's time we check back in with the spiders of the multiverse as we see them once again come together to face a common threat. So, I hope to see you on Saturday as we enter into what I call the Spider-Geddon era. So till then, I hope you have a good evening, as always, and, well, take care.